In the Middle Ages, a civilization was taking shape on the European continent. Nobles and kings, faith and warfare, culture and knowledge, commerce and creativity, all these elements laid the foundation for the modern age. This is the story of how Europe was born. In the first 2 centuries AD, the vast Roman Empire encircled the Mediterranean. It was a time of stability, prosperity, and peace, an era known as Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. People enjoyed a flourishing culture, a relatively good quality of life, and considerable security. All of this was possible thanks to the centralized Roman government and its advanced infrastructure system. In the far eastern frontiers of the empire, a new religion emerged, Christianity. Initially just a small branch of Judaism, but it gradually spread throughout the pagan Roman world. In the 4th century, Christianity was accepted by the emperors and became the state religion of Rome. However, by then the Roman Golden Age had ended. The empire began to weaken due to inflation, disease, famine, and invasions. Governing such a vast territory from a single center became impossible. In 395 AD, the empire was split in two, the western half with Rome as its capital, and the eastern half with Constantinople as its capital, also known as the Byzantine Empire. The east remained wealthy, urbanized, and thriving, while the west was poor, rural, and fragile. Therefore, it could not last long. In the deep forests beyond the empire's borders, barbarian peoples began to migrate. Most of them were Germanic tribes, led by warlords and their loyal bands of warriors. These groups applied increasing pressure on the Rhine and Danube rivers and the Danube. With few options left, the Western Roman Empire was forced to allow them into its territory. Eventually, the borders collapsed, allowing many different peoples to migrate and settle within the empire. Whether guests or invaders, these peoples carved up Roman territory. As the authority of the imperial court collapsed day by day, in 476 AD, the barbarian chieftain Odoacer deposed the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustulus. The young emperor held no real power, but his overthrow marked a pivotal moment. The Western Roman Empire no longer existed. The period known as the Dark Ages officially began. Romans, Christians, and barbarians. These three major elements blended together to form medieval Europe. Around 500 AD, many new kingdoms emerged across Europe, ruled by barbarian kings. Their aristocracy was a blend of Roman and barbarian peoples, gradually converted to Christianity. The most prominent kingdoms at the time were the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Visigoths in Spain, and the Franks in Gaul, which later became France. However, these kingdoms lacked the essential elements needed to operate a strong, stable state. Major ancient cities lost population. Many places fell into ruin. The Roman transportation network collapsed, making long-distance communication and trade gradually disappear. Coinage was no longer in circulation, leading to the collapse of the economy that once supported professional standing armies. Literacy rates declined drastically, causing the administrative system to nearly become paralyzed. Most notably, peace and security had vanished. Western Europe became impoverished, its mostly rural regions increasingly isolated, divided both politically and linguistically. During the early centuries of the Middle Ages, Western Europe was insignificant compared to its more powerful neighbors. In the 6th century, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian attempted to reconquer the West and restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. But after retaking Italy from the Ostrogoths, the country was Romanized again. The peninsula soon became a target for new invaders. The Lombards, the Byzantines, were forced to accept that the divide between East and West was permanent. However, not long after that, they faced another division, this time between the North and the South. In the 7th century, Arab armies swept across the Middle East and North Africa at astonishing speed, forming a vast Islamic empire. Where there had once been a single flourishing civilization, now emerged three distinct civilizations: Islamic, Byzantine, and medieval Western. For a brief time in the 8th century, it seemed that the weak West was on the verge of being swallowed by the Islamic Empire. The Muslim armies had destroyed the kingdom of the Visigoths in Spain and continued marching forward into Frankish territory. But in the year 732, at the Battle of Tours, they were defeated by the Franks. Under the command of Charles Martel, the westward expansion of Islam was halted, and Charles the Victor left his name to a dynasty that would forever change European history, the Carolingian dynasty. The son of Charles Martel, Pepin seized the Frankish crown through a coup. He attacked the Lombards, conquered Italy, and presented the Pope with a priceless gift, a territory of his own. Pepin's son was the legendary Charlemagne. After ascending the Frankish throne in the year 768, he spent decades waging wars and expanding his territory, eventually ruling most of Christian Europe. In Western Europe, in the year 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne As Roman emperor, over 3 centuries after Rome's fall, the West once again had an emperor. The Carolingian Empire was the first great power of medieval Western Europe and left a long-lasting and profound legacy. Thanks to Charlemagne, who promoted the flourishing of knowledge and culture. The first medieval Renaissance aimed to restore the knowledge and lost achievements of antiquity. The empire spread across the West political models, organizational structures, social orders, ideologies, and aspirations, especially the ideal of a unified Christian West. These elements became the foundation of medieval civilization in Europe. However, the Carolingian Empire did not last long. Attempts to build a centralized government in the West failed due to a lack of physical infrastructure. Small cities meant a weak economy, a limited bureaucracy, and a poor communication system. After Charlemagne passed away, his 3 grandsons began fighting for power. And in 843, under the Treaty of Verdun, they divided the Frankish Empire into 3 parts. The kingdom in the middle quickly weakened, leaving West Francia, which later became France, and East Francia, the land that would eventually develop into Germany. These kingdoms continued to fragment and disintegrate, a process further accelerated by external pressure. During the 9th and 10th centuries, a new wave of invasions swept in and struck the Carolingian world, which was collapsing from every direction. The Vikings came from the north, along the coasts and rivers of Europe, plundering and spreading fear among people everywhere. The Magyars, also known as the horse-riding Hungarians, advanced from the east, devastating undefended settlements. And finally, Muslim pirates and raiders landed on the southern coasts of Europe. The entire continent seemed under siege, as the West gradually fell apart under repeated attacks. The power of kings weakened, while local nobles grew ever stronger. Europe gradually became covered by a dense network of wooden castles, which served as fortified residences for local noble families. From these fortresses, lords controlled the surrounding peasants, collecting their wealth and resources. Lords ruled their territories through coercive power. In earlier centuries, peasants had once been an essential part of the infantry, the foot soldiers, but new military innovations such as the stirrup transformed cavalry into the decisive force on the battlefield. This new style of warfare demanded resources that only the nobility could afford. Thus, Europe's elite gradually became full-time, professional warriors in a world governed by a warrior aristocracy. Territorial power was established through the feudal system. One noble granted land and protection to another in return for loyalty and military service. Kingdoms became increasingly complex networks of personal relationship and mutual obligations. Kings were often weak and easily overshadowed by powerful vassals and lords. This system came to be known as feudalism. It would take centuries before centralized states re-emerged in the West. By the 10th century, the situation began to change. A more favorable climate boosted agricultural productivity. External invasions ceased as the Vikings and Magyars settled down and integrated into Western Christian society. In some regions, royal power began to strengthen. In England, King Alfred the Great and his successors unified the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, founding the Kingdom of England. In West Francia, although political fragmentation continued, the Vikings who had settled in the north swore loyalty to the Frankish king. They became Christianized French people, known as the Normans. The Duchy of Normandy became a buffer zone against further attacks. Meanwhile, in East Francia, Otto I, king of the Germans, defeated the Hungarians at the Battle of Lechfeld in the year 955, ending the invasions from the east. After settling down, the Hungarians established their own Christian kingdom on their own land. After this victory, Otto the Great was crowned emperor. In the year 960, Europe once again had an empire, this time a German one, which later came to be known as the Holy Roman Empire. After centuries of chaos, Europe finally regained stability and the confidence to step into a new era. The year 1000 marked a turning point in European history, ushering in 300 years of growth and prosperity. A more favorable climate, combined with new farming technologies and techniques, led to an agricultural revolution. Europeans produced more food than ever before, resulting in rapid population growth. Many new villages and towns were established, while older settlements expanded. Across Europe, forests were cleared to make way for farmland, with more and more land being brought under cultivation. This paved the way for economic expansion and the revival of trade. Vibrant trade networks accelerated. Rapid urbanization. Both old and new cities grew larger, becoming international centers for a rising merchant class. These merchants gradually gained autonomy from feudal lords and established self-governing cities. This trend was most evident in Italy, where merchants revived Mediterranean trade. As living standards improved, architecture, art, and music flourished. Literacy across Europe increased, and the first universities were founded under the patronage of the Church. The European intellectual class launched a new renaissance based on rediscovering and reviving lost ancient knowledge. But Europeans did not limit themselves to expanding within the continent. They also began to expand outward. In the High Middle Ages, the nobility from the core lands of the Carolingian Empire conquered and settled new territories, expanding the borders of Western Christendom. This process, known as the Europeanization of Europe, created a broader and more unified civilization. In 1060s, William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, launched an invasion of England. At the Battle of Hastings, he dealt a decisive blow to the Anglo-Saxons and their rule. England thereafter became a stronghold of the Normans. On the Iberian Peninsula, the northern Christian kingdoms fought against the Muslims in the south, leading to the expansion of their control over the entire peninsula. This war was seen as a reconquest of southern Italy and the island of Sicily. The Norman warriors conquered vast territories from the Byzantines and the Muslims. They allied with the Pope and established another Norman kingdom. In Eastern Europe, German nobles and peasants gradually migrated eastward, settling on Slavic lands. But Europeans set their sights even farther. In the year 1095, Pope Urban II called upon Christian warriors to march east to liberate Jerusalem and other holy lands from the infidel. The Muslims, the crusading armies poured eastward, establishing several states along the Mediterranean coast. However, these states were merely fragile outposts of the West. Over the next 200 years, these territories were gradually reconquered by Muslim forces. Even so, the Crusades sent an important message. The Catholic Church had awakened. In the early Middle Ages, the Pope's authority was weak, holding almost no influence outside Italy. The Church at that time was merely a loose network of priests and monks appointed and controlled by the local nobility. By the 10th and 11th centuries, a reform movement emerged aiming to renew the Church and society entirely. The reformers called for freeing the Church from secular power, meaning separating it from the influence of kings and the nobility, to rebuild it as a monarchy ruled by the Pope as its supreme head. Pope Gregory VII, a passionate reformer, clashed with the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV over the right to appoint bishops within the empire. The first confrontation ended when Henry was forced to wait for 3 days in the snow outside the fortress of Canossa, begging the Pope for forgiveness. However, in their second confrontation, Henry invaded and appointed a pope of his own, forcing Gregory into exile. Although it seemed at first that the emperor had won, by the 12th century, it became clear that the Pope and the reform movement had prevailed. The Church had become a powerful institution, centralized and tightly hierarchical, with complex administrative and legal structures and vast resources. The Church's power spread across Europe. At the top of the power pyramid stood the Pope, ruling the Church as an absolute monarch. As the popes grew stronger, the kings began to feel jealous, and soon they followed suit. The power of medieval kings was limited by the armed nobility. During the High Middle Ages, the number of nobles grew significantly. Castles sprang up everywhere. Wood was replaced by stone and designs became larger and sturdier. The life and culture of the nobility became more refined, with the emergence of Christian knightly ideals and the code of conduct known as chivalry. But at the same time, in some regions, the nobility faced the rise of kings and increasingly powerful kingdoms. In England, the Anglo-Norman dynasty built a compact and unified state, escaping the feudal chaos common on the European continent. On the Iberian Peninsula, the reconquest of lands from Muslim rule strengthened the authority of Christian kings, paving the way for centralized states. In France, the Capetian kings gradually expanded their own domains, forming an organized and powerful kingdom with real authority. However, in the Holy Roman Empire, the opposite occurred. This once powerful empire fragmented into a patchwork of countless autonomous principalities. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa tried to restore the empire's former glory, but failed. The imperial title, once mighty, became merely symbolic, chosen by the prince-electors. The Middle Ages witnessed an agricultural revolution, urban growth, territorial expansion, and the rise of both the papacy, kings, and a flourishing cultural life. But around 1300, the climate became harsher. Growth halted and famine spread. A great catastrophe was approaching. The 14th century marked a turning point in European history in 1347. A global pandemic, now known as the Black Death, swept across the continent. The plague spread rapidly across Europe and within only a few short years claimed the lives of about 1/3 of the population. This was an unprecedented demographic disaster. In human history, many settlements vanished completely from the map. Subsequent outbreaks continued for centuries. Yet during the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe gradually recovered. And for some survivors, the aftermath of the plague was not entirely bleak. With population decline, land became more abundant, while demand for labor surged. The bargaining power of peasants and laborers increased, and they began demanding better living conditions. When the nobility refused, revolts erupted across Europe. Almost all were brutally suppressed. Yet in the long run, change was inevitable. In Western Europe, peasants gained new freedoms and opportunities, while workers received higher wages. From the darkness of the devastating plague, creativity re-emerged. Technological advances brought windmills, watermills and eyeglasses, new techniques in manufacturing and metalworking, and of course, the printing press. In rapidly recovering cities, new cultural movements flourished. A new renaissance began in Italy, aimed at reviving and surpassing the great achievements of ancient Greece and Rome. Renaissance scholars formed a new way of viewing the world and humanity's place within it. They called the previous millennium the Dark Ages and saw themselves as a bridge between the medieval and the modern era. By the late 14th and 15th centuries, gunpowder had completely transformed warfare in Europe. Even the bravest knights could be defeated from afar by ordinary infantrymen, and the strongest castles could be destroyed by cannon. Maintaining these new armies of infantry and artillery was so costly that only kings could afford it. As they sought to monopolize the use of force within their territories, kings consolidated their power, asserting dominance over the nobility. Nobles, having lost military superiority, began serving their kings as administrators and courtiers. The sovereign state began to take shape. During this turbulent era, Europe's new armies were constantly tested. The 100 Years' War between England and France ravaged the French countryside. The tide of war turned because of a peasant girl named Joan of Arc, who rallied the French army to rise against the English. Eventually, the English were expelled from France. On the Iberian Peninsula, the marriage between Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile led to the birth of a unified Spain. Their forces conquered Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the peninsula. These events laid the foundation for the formation of modern nations such as England, France, and Spain, while other regions like Germany and Italy would wait several more centuries to achieve unification. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, Europe not only recovered from the crisis caused by the Black Death, but rebuilt itself on firmer foundations. Step by step, Europe began turning its gaze outward. By 1500, Portugal had sailed around Africa into the Indian Ocean, opening trade routes to the Far East, while Spain looked westward, crossed the Atlantic, and reached the Americas. Columbus's voyage in 1492 is often seen as the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the early modern era. In the centuries that followed, Europe's wave of expansion reshaped the entire world and formed the foundations of modern civilization we live in today. If you want me to make more videos that explain topics like this in greater depth, please like and subscribe to Knowledge Station. Thank you for watching.